This is a film about a voyage along the historic coast of Victoria Land in the Ross Sea and Deepest Antarctica. To get to the Ross Sea and back, the total distance sailed was 6,400 nautical miles, or 12,000 kilometers. There are a number of historic sites and modern research stations along the coast of Victoria Land, but access to them was totally dependent on cooperative pack ice conditions and wind speeds.
We sailed past the end of the Drygalski Ice Tongue, which was discovered by British explorer Robert Falcon Scott in 1902. It is thought to be at least 4,000 years old. The Ice Tongue is essentially a floating glacier that stretches 70 kilometers out to sea from the end of the David Glacier. It ranges from 14 to 24 kilometers in width and is a few hundred meters thick. In March 2000, a huge iceberg named B-15 calved from the Ross Ice Shelf near Roosevelt Island. B-15 measured around 300 kilometers long and 40 kilometers wide. B-15 eventually fragmented, and a piece called iceberg B-15A eventually collided with the Drygalski Ice Tongue in April 2005, breaking off an 8 square kilometer section of the ice tongue. In March 2006, iceberg C-16 also hit the ice tongue, breaking off another piece. The large ocean swells moving through the pack ice gave the seals and penguins resting on the floes a dynamic ride. Sometimes when we passed by a seal or penguin resting on a floe, they would take one look at the ship and then re-enter the ocean. Having passed by the Drygalski Ice Tongue, we entered into Terra Nova Bay and started pushing our way through the pack ice to reach either Inexpressible Island or the Italian or South Korean stations that are found in the bay. Our progress through the ice pack was very slow as the ship's power is not exceptional. The big swells in the ice pack move the ice floes and penguins on them dramatically up and down. Our ice-strengthened ship, with its 4,300 horsepower, was simply too underpowered to push through the pack ice. So after an hour or so of trying, the captain headed out of the bay, back towards the open sea. Watching corpulent seals moving on ice was like watching an earthworm moving about. Mature Weddell seals are about 3 meters long and weigh about 500 kilograms, making them amongst the largest seal. We saw many Weddell seals as they have a circumpolar distribution around Antarctica. Ironically, these seals are named after a sealer, Captain James Weddell, who led sealing expeditions to Antarctica in the 1820s. The seemingly never-ending pack ice made for slow going, and the ship only has about 4,300 horsepower. Given the failure to land in Terra Nova Bay, we sailed on past Cape Washington and into Wood Bay, where the expedition leader thought there would be better conditions, but in the event, the sea and wind kept us aboard again. Although we didn't get off the ship at Wood Bay, we were lucky to see a pod of orca hunting along the edge of the pack ice. Surprisingly, the possibility of the orca's dorsal fins hitting the ice floes didn't stop the orca from cruising through the pack ice in search of food. The Adare, resting on the ice floe, was probably unaware of the pod of orca that was entering the scene as he jumped into the water. The orca concentrated their search for food along the edge of the pack ice where they could more easily attack anything edible found on an ice floe. The orca were rapidly swimming through the pack ice but continually lifting their heads up to check the ice floes for edibles. The orca became fixated on looking at the ice mushroom, which from our vantage point didn't seem to have any animal resting on it, and in the event, the orca gave up on the ice mushroom and continued cruising along the edge of the pack ice. The orca were spy hopping in the pack ice. When spy hopping, the orca sticks its head out of the water to see if anything edible is on the ice floes. Should a penguin or seal be noticed, then an attack would likely follow.
They're spy hopping in the ice. There it is again. They're there. You see them?
Soon the orca swam out of view and we resumed our course towards Cape Adare. The big swell caused waves to break dramatically against the icebergs, with water being thrown up to 30 meters in the air. Without stopping, we continued along the coast towards Cape Hallett. The big swell caused by a distant cyclone made for heavy pitching of the ship. Near Cape Hallett, we entered the extensive ice pack in Mowbray Bay to hopefully find calmer winds for an off-ship activity. The Cape was the location of a scientific base that was established in the International Geophysical Year of 1957 and was manned permanently until 1964 when there was a major fire. The ship's 4,300 horsepower engine strained to push the ship forward into the pack ice. Again, the ship wasn't able to push deep into the ice-choked Mowbray Bay. Pushing further into the pack ice, we passed by a number of surprised Adare penguins. Mowbray Bay is ringed by the beautiful Admiralty mountain range. Finally, the pack ice's increasing thickness stopped our progress, and so it was decided to use the helicopters to make a flight-seeing trip out over the distant shoreline.
With the blades attached, it was soon time to lift off for a flight-seeing trip out to Cape Hallett. Once airborne, the extent of the pack ice was obvious, and it was also clear how little our ship had actually penetrated into the pack ice despite hours of pushing. The flight-seeing trip took us over the dense pack ice holding some large icebergs prisoners to the rocky promontory of Cape Hallett. Once over Cape Hallett, the coastal polymina of Edso Inlet was evident. This area of open water results from strong katabatic winds driving sea ice away from the coastline.
West of Cape Hallett, we flew near the large breeding colony of Adare penguins on C.V. Hook. Mount Herschel, named in 1841 by British explorer James Clark Ross in honor of British astronomer John Herschel, isn't the highest peak in the Admiralty Mountains, but its razor-sharp outline dominates Mowbray Bay. Mount Herschel was first climbed in 1967 by a team led by Sir Edmund Hillary of Everest fame. As there were 3 helicopters coming and going from the ship, at times we'd have to circle the ship and wait to land on board if another helicopter was loading passengers or refueling.
Finally, with the departure of the other helicopter from the landing pad, we were able to make our landing back aboard.
It took several hours to complete the flight-seeing flights, so there was plenty of time on the ship to watch seals and penguins coming and going. The brash ice was so thick that the seal had difficulty getting underwater. Mowbray Bay in the bright sunshine was full of wondrous sights. Although we were deep in the pack ice, The huge swells continued to move the ship dramatically up and down.
The swells made movement across the ice difficult and dangerous for the penguins. Surprisingly, the heaving ice suddenly revealed an emperor penguin.
After 11 hours in the pack ice, the helicopter flights were complete and we pushed out of the pack ice into the open water. During our stay in Mowbray Bay, the light conditions changed dramatically, making for some beautiful scenes. After much pushing, we were finally at the ice edge where we entered the ice-free waters and our speed could increase again. As we were exiting the pack ice, we passed a minke whale that was just entering the pack ice from the open water. Leaving Cape Hallett, we sailed along the Adare Peninsula towards Cape Adare and passed by the Possession Islands. These islands are a collection of small islands and rocks.
Foyne Island is named after Sven Foyne, a Norwegian who introduced the modern harpoon cannon to the whaling industry in the 19th century, which then went on to decimate the whale population in the Southern Ocean. An Adelie penguin rookery covers much of Foyne Island. The green algae growing on the snow added color to what otherwise was a drab landscape. The basalt columns clearly showed the volcanic origin of the Possession Islands. Favreau Pillar is a volcanic remnant dramatically rising straight out of the sea. The large tabular iceberg in the background added to the wonderful scene. The view of an iceberg through the twin arches of Christensen Rocks was intriguing. The dead penguin floating on the surface was a reminder of the precarious nature of life in Antarctica.
The Possession Islands were named by Captain James Clark Ross in commemoration of him planting the British flag on Possession Island on January the 12th, 1841, to claim their possession for Queen Victoria. The most interesting sight on Possession Island was the strange sighting of Adelie penguins lining the cornice cliff. Clearly these penguins were oblivious to the danger of the cornices breaking off and plunging some 30 meters into the Ross Sea.
Soon the Possession Islands fell astern as we sailed on towards Cape Adare, with a glorious sunset over Mount Herschel and the other transantarctic mountains.
Leaving the Possession Islands astern, we sailed along the Adare Peninsula towards Cape Adare, which separates the Ross Sea to the east from the Southern Ocean to the west. We finally rounded Cape Adare and entered Robertson Bay, which would be our final stop in Antarctica, so we hope for favorable conditions for off-ship activities. When we finally arrived off Cape Adare, the winds reported to be gusting to 80 knots had died down, and it was dead calm. As Cape Adare is home to a large Adelie penguin colony, the waters and ice of Robertson Bay were alive with penguins. It was fascinating to see the sight of penguins porpoising along. While penguins can't fly through the air with their flippers, many penguin species take to the air as they launch themselves out of the water. Just before doing so, they release air bubbles from their feathers. This cuts down the drag on their bodies, allowing them to double or triple their swimming speeds quickly and to launch into the air. For example, most penguins swim underwater at around 6 to 11 kilometers per hour, but the fastest penguin, the Gen 2, can reach top speeds of 35 kilometers per hour when porpoising.
But you know the ship is moving slowly when the penguins are steaming by you.
We cruised south into Robertson Bay towards Duke of York Island, where we were supposed to land like Borchgrevink had done in 1899. However, although the conditions were favorable, the landing was cancelled, so we sailed back towards Cape Adare on a dead flat Robertson Bay. Even though the waters of Robertson Bay were dead calm, our expedition leader dithered about what to do, so we sat idle for hours, which gave us time to watch minke whales and adeles swimming about.
Oh, there they are. See, do you see them? They're out in the open water now. Okay, so it's all happening for us. We got the whales, we got the penguins.
Yeah, but we've got no zodiacs.
Yeah. They're motoring right along. They're not wasting time doing anything.
When penguins are resting on the water's surface, they look much more bird-like than when they are either swimming underwater or walking around on land. Flying over the ice floes were giant petrels and skuas looking for food, which primarily means penguins. On one ice floe, schools were happily stripping penguin carcasses down to the bone. While on another floe, a variety of predators and prey were relaxing together in apparent harmony. It was surprising to see the scarce white morph of the southern giant petrel.
Oh, there's one right in front of you.
In the early morning hours, the handful of people on deck were blessed to see a pod of minke whales swimming about in the golden light of sunrise. After hours of dithering, the trip leader decided that we could finally visit Ridley Beach, which is home to one of the largest Adare penguin colonies in Antarctica. As well, the beach is home to Borchgrevink's hut, which is the first human overwinter habitation on the continent.
This is a great view. Sunny day. The ship is beautiful.
The Zodiac trip to Ridley Beach was a long one as the ship stopped far offshore, so we had lots of time to enjoy the slalom ride through the ice floes. Arriving off Ridley Beach, the size of the colony was evident, and in fact the Ridley Beach Adare penguin colony is currently the largest for the species, with approximately 340,000 breeding pairs in season. Studies have found that the first penguin pioneers arrived at Ridley Beach about 50 AD, when Julius Caesar was beginning his invasion of Britain, and so some 150 generations have used this site. However, it's surmised that Ridley Beach will probably be abandoned in the near future due to rising sea levels in the region. It was entertaining to watch the molting chicks braving their first swim in the ocean as they sought to join adult penguins on a nearby ice floe. The penguins are prey for many predators, both on land and in the water. On land, the main predators are birds like the skua and the giant petrel. As our visit was at the end of the breeding season for the Adare penguins, the chicks were molting and their parents were trying to stop feeding the chicks that were as big as them. However, the chicks didn't like the new arrangement, so would chase their parents around to get food. In January 1895, an expedition led by Norwegian explorer Karsten Borchgrevink landed at Cape Adare as the first documented landing on Antarctica. Borchgrevink returned to the Cape leading his own British-funded expedition in 1899 and erected 2 huts, the first human structures built on Antarctica. The expedition members wintered over and the survivors were picked up in January 1900. This was the first expedition party ever to winter over on the Antarctic continent. The expedition's zoologist Nikolai Hansen, who died during the winter, is buried at Cape Adare. Unfortunately, our limited time ashore was cut short for an unexplained reason, and we had to return to the ship. Back on board the ship, the good weather continued, and the reason for the hasty departure from Ridley Beach was never made clear. Luckily, the good wildlife viewing continued in Robertson Bay. Our final activity on the Antarctic continent was flightseeing over Shipley Glacier. The Shipley Glacier is 40 kilometers long and splits in two as it nears the ocean. Waiting for our helicopter flight, we got a good view of the rotor blades being installed on the Eurocopter AS-355 helicopter. A large nunatak separates the east and west arms of the Shipley Glacier as they flow into Robertson Bay. The seaward end of the glacier was first mapped by the northern party of the British Antarctic Expedition in 1911. The Shipley Glacier is very heavily crevassed as it descends to the sea. The west arm of the Shipley Glacier had capped off huge icebergs due to the large crevasses that run across it. At the west arm, we turned around and headed back to the ship. Soon we were flying back to the ship and the end of our final helicopter flight of this voyage. The flight back from the glacier was uneventful, but at least one flight saw a large pod of minke whales in the water. After the flightseeing finished, we witnessed a superpod of 30 minke whales swimming past right in front of the ship. The sound of the pod breathing as it passed by the ship was reminiscent of the sound of a steam engine. This event was the second most amazing sighting on our trip after that of the orca attacking and killing a minke whale. The sun lighting up the Admiralty Mountains provided a wonderful last glimpse of continental Antarctica. Leaving Cape Adare, we bid adieu to continental Antarctica and sailed some 150 kilometers northwest to the uninhabited Bellini Islands.
Take me somewhere nice, to some tired island in your heart called paradise.